are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning J. Michael Fay. J. Michael Fay has worked with the Wildlife Conservation Society since 1991. He is currently an explorer in residence with National Geographic. He spent 6 years in the Peace Corps as a botanist in Tunisia and the Central African Republic, and later returned there doing work for the Missouri Botanical Garden. Some of his most notable projects have included walking the entire 2,000-mile corridor of remaining intact forest blocks between Congo and Gabon, completing the Mega Flyover, an 8-month aerial survey of development in Africa, which captured more than 116,000 vertical images, many of which are visible on Google Earth, and walking the entire range of the Redwood Forest in western United States, more than 700 miles. And he is here to talk about his recent investigations into mining impacts in British Columbia. Michael, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So, start out, tell us, how did you get involved with your investigation into mining in British Columbia?
Well, I'm a conservationist by profession, but I went back to Alaska about 7 years ago to kind of live. You know, I'm starting to get old, and I'm a wilderness guy, and the only great wilderness left in the United States is in Alaska. So I've always said, and I've said it for decades, I'm going back to Alaska. You know, when I get old and gray, that's where I'm headed. And that's what I did a few years ago. And when I got there, I found this perfect spot, you know, 2 million acres of designated wilderness area in southeast Alaska, beautiful rainforest, virgin mountains, no logging, no roads, tons of wildlife, fish in the rivers, the kind of place where somebody like me can feel like I'm okay. You know, I can be happy for the rest of my life living in this wilderness, you know, and it's 80 miles from a road. Perfect. You know, how can it be that I can find this place? And then I started hearing about mining upstream in British Columbia, because the river I live on crosses the border into British Columbia, and I started asking people, and not very many people knew about these mines in southeast Alaska. Started asking politicians and other people about these mines, and wasn't getting much information, but I started kind of sleuthing it on the web, you know, and started Googling stuff, you know, and starting to figure this out. And I started looking at the British Columbia government websites on mining claims, and the deeper I went, the more I realized, my God, I'm looking at the largest gold mining complex on Earth here that's just about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, you know. And the reason it has happened is because of this kind of speculative bubble for gold that has occurred in the last 5 years, and in British Columbia, because of the system that's in place, you can be sitting in Malaysia and get online and register and claim a piece of British Columbia, and that claim gives you unbelievable rights on that land. You can dig holes, you can build roads, you can bring in helicopters, you can make camps, you can tell people that they can't trespass. You can you know, figure out that there's some mineral there, and then you can create a company and you can float it on the stock market, and you can make tons of money before you ever extract a single ounce of gold. And that's what I discovered in it, and it's huge. It literally is the largest proposed gold mining complex on the planet.
And so what has been your response? Are people rallying around this?
Well, you know, I went to the Department of Natural Resources in Alaska. I went to the EPA. I went to the Congress and senatorial offices. I started talking to the local administrators. I talked to the Forest Service. I talked to anybody that would listen, Fish and Game. And my sense was from the kind of bureaucrats, the people in government, that they just don't want to touch this thing. You know, that it's across the border. We have good relations with Canada. We just don't want to do it. We're too busy or too lazy or too politically adverse to stirring up trouble. But the fact is, we have a boundary waters treaty with Canada. 1909, we signed a treaty with Canada to do exactly this, which is to look at projects that will impact water and to talk about them bilaterally with Canada. That's the whole reason for this treaty. And it is used, especially in the Great Lakes, quite a bit. That's why it was created, because of the pollution in the Great Lakes back in the early part of the 20th century, when people thought, God, what's going to happen if the United States decides to completely pollute these Great Lakes, and Canada has no say, so that's why we signed this treaty. It's exactly what's happening now. All these mines are on the British Columbia side in Canada, but all of that water flows into Southeast Alaska. So why wouldn't we have a discussion with the British Columbians? Why wouldn't we have a discussion with Canada? Why wouldn't our politicians or our people responsible for managing our natural resources, why wouldn't they engage the Canadians and have the public engaged in this process? I don't know, but it's not happening. There's no way it's happening, and I've tried vehemently with many different people and many different kind of organizations to try to get things moving along, but so far we don't have much momentum.
So talk about what are the potential environmental impacts.
Well, if you look at this mining complex and you put it together, and that's one of the things I've been doing is putting together this enormous Google Earth project. And if you put the parcels of the claims over the entire coastal range of northwestern British Columbia, it disappears under parcels. It looks like the LA Basin. It looks like the Great Plains when they parcelized it for agriculture. It's wall-to-wall claims. There are thousands and thousands, and there isn't one stitch of land that hasn't been claimed in the last 10 years. So you kind of look at that, and then you look at, okay, how many of these projects or claims have potential to really become mines? And you start adding that up, and that's what I've done. I've cataloged I've pretty much gone from claim to claim, figuring out, okay, which projects are real, which ones have assays that are looking good, which ones are probably, if things go well and the price of gold holds, which ones are going to become mines. Well, there's over 50 of them that have potential to really become mines, at least. That's like ones that are truly active right now. And then if you start looking at ones that are really kind of in the process, and in order to do that, I got a float plane and went back there and really have been looking at it for the last 2 summers. There's probably 10 projects that will account for about 6 billion tons of acid rock ore that will be extracted from these mountains and stored behind dams, in many cases taller than Hoover Dam, because the ground there is so steep that you need a tall dam to create volume. And this is one of the areas on Earth that has, one of the greatest rainfalls. It has more snow than just about anywhere, avalanches, tectonic activity, and this unbelievable runoff, and so you think that's the time bomb that we're looking at, is 6-point-something billion tons of ore that they will take out of the ground, crush up, and store behind walls of dirt. And those walls of dirt have to last for the rest of time, because as soon as one breaches, it's going to take out those creeks, because they have this acid generating, once it's exposed to oxygen and to water, it generates acid, and it will poison these rivers, and it will poison all of the fisheries resources of Southeast Alaska if you get a breach. And of course everyone says, well, that can't happen. It's like, that's what they thought in Japan last year when things went south nuclear-wise. Things do happen.
They've had similar breaches down like in the Appalachians.
Yeah, and again, this is a place that gets, if you take the Appalachians, for instance, I don't know what the exact rainfall is, but it's probably 35 inches of rain, something like that, in the Appalachians. We get, in some places up in southeast Alaska, almost 10 times that. The amount of rain, this is a rainforest we're talking about. It's got more rainfall than any place in North America. I mean, we're talking about one of the top 5 rainfall areas on Earth with some of the steepest slopes on Earth. So the probability that you're going to be able to keep all that water from touching this acid waste is, in my opinion, extremely low, especially when you put it out for the rest of time.
So how much gold are we talking about that they're looking at extracting, and maybe talk about how they externalize, they privatize the benefits of this and externalize the costs?
Well, the ore kind of value for gold is usually well below 1 gram per ton, which means that it's about 3,000 to 4,000 to 1 weight-wise. And so when you look at it volumetrically, since gold is so heavy compared to rock, general rock, the volume that you're talking about from an acid waste perspective compared to the gold you have is, a dump truck basically equals a gold ring, and that's kind of the equivalent. So we're talking about enormous amounts of waste, and when you think about managing that waste, the companies, while they may say that they are responsible, when you look at the time horizon that's legally binding for them, it numbers in the low decades. It does not look at even a century, let alone thousands of years, and that waste will be there forever. It will be there for the rest of the time. It's a time bomb, and if that thing breaches or leaks, it will be leaking into this creek probably forever. So for me, I wrote to the Premier of British Columbia, and I said, you're delivering thousands of tons of waste to each of the citizens today. You're committing every citizen in this province to thousands of tons of waste that they need to manage for the rest of time. Is that what you really want to do? And I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like that hasn't even thought about it, hasn't even quantified in their brains what it really means, what they're doing, But it's thousands of tons of waste that they're committing to manage for the rest of the time. So me as a voter, if you said to me, okay, we're going to have jobs, some jobs. Most of the people that work here are going to be from other provinces, but that's beside the point. But are you willing to accept to manage for the rest of time 4,000, 5,000 tons of waste, as an individual? And you looked at the costs of that. Any voter would say, heck no, there's no way. Forget it. That's a crazy idea. That's a crazy idea. And you think about somebody buying a gold ring, and saying, okay, but here you have to sign this contract because you're going to be responsible for the cost of maintaining 26 tons of acid waste for the rest of time. And this bond that you've signed will be passed down to your children and to your children's children unless they can sell it to someone. And if they can't sell it, then you're legally bound to manage this waste for the rest of the time. That's what needs to be calculated into these mining projects, and it isn't. They will say it is, but it isn't. And if that were done, it would completely change the way this whole grand scheme is unfolding, because they're externalizing one of the primary costs to society for doing what they're doing, And it's not even, it's like, just put it in those terms. 26 tons per gold ring. When you get married, are you willing, because you're making this commitment for the rest of your life, are you willing to, as your first act, just because you bought this one little bauble, to commit to, you and your wife managing this waste for the rest of the time? You wouldn't buy the ring. No one would buy the ring. No one. Unless they're just crazy.
So how does the government of Canada compare with the U.S. government in terms of being in bed with corporations?
Well, that's a good question. I would say that we have a long history in this country of trying to minimize the monopolistic tendencies of companies, and it's a natural thing. It's like, if you can monopolize resources as an individual, and you're a hunter and gatherer, and there's no downside to that, you're going to do it, And so it's a natural phenomenon that a corporation would like to monopolize a resource. They would love to be the only company producing a certain thing that everyone buys, because then they become fabulously rich. So in this country, if you go back in time and look at Teddy Roosevelt, who, in my opinion, was one of the great leaders that we've had in this country, one of his great obsessions was about managing the natural resource base. He said it many, many times, and he enacted a lot of policies to follow up with the talk, which was, as a nation, what you really are as a nation is your resource base. And if you don't manage your resource base and you are beholden to others for your resources, you will never be secure. You will never be able to really be comfortable in progressing as a nation. So one of our primary objectives, and he put it many times, this is our number one problem that we need to face, is managing our natural resource base. Because at the time he became president, corporations were gobbling up, swallowing up, monopolizing a lot of resources. And he could see the train wreck coming, and so he said, one of my primary goals is to undo these combinations, to force opening of these markets so that we have a diverse number of people who are involved. And so we have that history here, but we also voted we had the Supreme Court of the United States, which everyone knows is highly political. That's an obvious fact that's known. It's not a contention that decided only a few years ago that corporations are individuals, and so they can put unlimited amounts of money into political campaigns through PACs. To me, that's the most fundamental decision that has happened in our country in decades, probably in a century, because it's basically undoing what Teddy Roosevelt did. He tried to isolate. It's kind of like church and state. It's corporation and state, and you can't have any association between politicians and corporations if you expect good leadership. You just can't have that. It doesn't make any sense. It's like church and state. Like having religious zealots running a country. Most people don't want that, and it's the same if corporations can put people in office through money. That's a very slippery slope. And in Canada. The current leadership there is totally with these guys, totally with the oil guys, totally with the mining guys, totally with the people who are developing Canada in a way that is creating this unbelievable legacy for people for the rest of time. And you look at the water, for instance, that's being consumed by the tar sands projects right now. It is in the billions of barrels, in unbelievably short amounts of time, and you think all that water has to be treated, and it's got chemicals in it, and it's now being dumped into these rivers, you think, are the real costs of that being accounted for? If you look at the tar sands and the oil and gas development in Alberta and British Columbia, it covers an area 1 to 2 times as big as Colorado. I mean, it's gigantic. It's the biggest industrial project on Earth, and you think, yeah, if people are voicing their concerns about global warming and about developing tar sands that are incredibly inefficient for energetically, as far as producing oil and gas, why shouldn't people be able to stand up and say, you know what, this pipeline shouldn't go in, because if it does, it's going to push tar sands from 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000 barrels a day up to millions of barrels, and the impacts of that haven't really been accounted for properly. So we citizens say no. Well, corporations say yes. So corporations are definitely winning in Canada, and I would say they're well on their way in this country. And if we happen upon a leader that completely follows the line, a president that follows the line, we could face the same kind of problems that Canada is currently facing.
Just over 5 minutes left. Talk a bit about the Boreal forest and the impacts on that. Well,
for me, it's kind of a continuum. We've got the rainforest along the coast, and then we the farther you go from the coast and the farther north you go, you get this enormous wilderness, basically. And that's why I'm so concerned about these mines. Is these are some of the great wilderness areas left on Earth. These are some of the places where you can fly in an airplane, which I did last summer, for hours and not see a single sign of human life. We're talking about one of the great sources of fresh water on Earth, one of the great refuges for wildlife, for billions of songbirds and waterfowl and other birds, a source of fresh water for all of North America for the rest of time. Water that creates unbelievable fisheries resources and everything else. So, you look at this enormous swath of forest, from the rainforest to the boreal forest in Canada. It truly is one of those places where we say, okay, we have an opportunity here to do it right. The human footprint is on a continuous march forward. We have 7.2 trillion, maybe someday, billion people on Earth, and so the human footprint will increase. Everybody wants an iPhone. Everybody wants what they want. And I know that. I'm not an idealist, but there's a way to do it right, and the way to do it right is to internalize the costs to the environment for what you're doing, and oil companies would laugh at that. They just say, this guy's crazy, he's a lunatic, he's a greenie, he's a left-winger, he's a communist maybe. But no, I'm being perfectly rational when I say, if you're going to buy a gold ring, you should buy the 26 tons of waste that goes along with it. It's perfectly normal. Why wouldn't you? Why should you put that on someone else? You bought the ring, so you take care of the waste. And if the company has to internalize those costs to add it to the cost of your ring, they should have to do that. And if you're going to produce a carbon balance that is impacting other people, and it is. I mean, look at we're facing unprecedented global warming. Those costs should be internalized, very simply. And if they were, the entire process that we see would change. Why? Because companies would be faced with regulation that they would have to follow. And if you don't regulate these guys, and Teddy Roosevelt, one of our great presidents, as I said before, he saw this and he said, this is insanity. We can't allow this to happen. Otherwise, these guys will just take all the resources and liquidate them and turn them into money, and they will control us. Is that what you want? And that's Teddy Roosevelt. That's not me talking. So if you want to say Teddy Roosevelt was a lunatic, then say it. But, he saw it very clearly, and he talked about it extremely coherently many, many times. So, it's a huge deal.
So just a few minutes left. So do you have a website, or how can people plug into helping this effort?
I set up a website myself. It's called the Unique River Post, UNUK River Post, which basically describes this mining scheme, greatest, biggest, most impactful gold complex on Earth. So you can go and look at the Google Maps and really click on all the little picks and shovels and see who these guys are and what they're doing, and you can look at who the investors are in these companies. And gold is on a slippery slope right now. So if people start making noise about these mines and the kind of process that's going on, the probability that these mining stocks will remain stable is lower, because people can start thinking about the externalization of billions of tons of acid rock going into our country. It's not like, we're Canadians. We're not Canadians, but we are going to be impacted by these projects in Canada. So, yeah, you can call your congresspeople. You can call these companies. You can, try to create the noise that's necessary to be able to start shifting the balance here, because that's what we need. And leadership has to come in. The EPA has to react. The Department of Natural Resources in Alaska has to react. The Forest Service has to react. All these entities need to react, and they're not. But if there were thousands of people telling them that they need to react, they would.
Just briefly, have you been inspired at all by the protests of people against the pipeline, the XL pipeline?
I would say they've won a few rounds, and for me, it's fantastic that people will take their time. Everyone has to eat every day. Everyone has their responsibilities. So if something becomes important enough that you're going to leave whatever you're going to do and you're going to take the time and effort to go protest something, as a normal citizen, I know, because I've been doing it for these mines and I've never done it before in my life. It's a commitment. It's there's a cost associated with it. And so, the fact that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people protesting this pipeline means that there's something there. There's a reason that all these people are starting to protest, even though protest is being discouraged, And so, I think it's fantastic. I really do. But it needs to be amplified by orders of magnitude if we're going to change things.
All right. Well, unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.